Okay, now we're going to look at some examples where we're going to try to calculate the diameter, not the circumference, but the diameter. Okay, so we know that our formula for circumference is C equals pi times d. But what if we're trying to calculate the diameter? In other words, we have pi, because we know what pi is, 3.14, and we may be given the circumference, but we need to calculate the diameter. Okay, well, when we do that, in order to do that, we need to leave the diameter on its own, the d on its own. So we've got here C equals pi times d. So we got to move our pi to the other side, and in order to move our pi to the other side of the equal sign, we have to do the opposite of what pi is doing. So what is pi doing? Pi is multiplying against the diameter. So what's the opposite of multiplication? The opposite is division. So that means that in order to leave d by itself and move pi to the other side of the equation, we have to divide. So we've got here our circumference then has to be divided by pi, and that's how we're able to calculate the diameter. So remember that. So this is how we calculate right here our circumference. But if we have our circumference, we have our pi, and we're trying to calculate our diameter, we then need to leave diameter on its own. And in order to do that, we have our circumference value divided by pi, and that will give us the diameter. Okay, so let's try to calculate the diameter in all of these questions. So our first one is very simple. We got to calculate the diameter, and we're giving a radius of 8 centimeters. Okay, so how do we say we calculate diameter when we have a radius? Well, it's radius times 2, because we said the radius is only half of the circle, half the distance from one side to the next. So in order to calculate diameter, which is the full side aside, we got to multiply by 2. So if we've got 8 multiplied by 2, then our diameter would be 16. And would be 16 what? 16 centimeters. Because that was the measure that we were using. Okay, now this one's a little bit more tricky. On this one, we're not giving the diameter, we're not giving the radius, we're giving the circumference. The circumference is the distance around the circle. And we need to calculate, obviously, the diameter, because that's what we're trying to do. So how do we calculate the diameter? Okay, so let's actually jot down what we have. So we know that the usual equation is circumference equals pi times d. Okay? Okay, do we have circumference? We have circumference. Circumference has been given to us. We have 250. Do we know what pi is? Well, pi is always the same thing. It's 3.14. And do we know what the diameter is? No, that's what we're trying to solve. So in order to solve it, we gotta leave diameter on its own. We gotta leave that d alone. And so we gotta move this one to the opposite side. And in order to do that, we gotta divide, because right now it's multiplying. So we leave our circumference value and we divide it by pi, and that's what's gonna give us our diameter. And so 250 divided by 3.14, we get 79.61. And we said it was meters, so that would be meters. So what we're doing here, and all this is all to remember, you can use this formula in order to get the diameter, which is circumference divided by pi is what equals diameter. I'm just showing you how we got there. Okay, so let's apply it now the easier way. So how do we get the diameter if we have circumference of 45? Okay, so we're going to use our formula of circumference over pi is what gives us the diameter. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we got a circumference of 45. Pi is 3.14. And that's what's going to give us our diameter. So our diameter is 14.33 meters. Okay, so you see what we're doing here? So we'll talk about those formulas one more time. And what we got here now is a radius. So we're giving a radius of 2 millimeters, and we need to calculate the diameter. So what's the diameter when we have radius? Well, the diameter is the radius times 2, because it's 2 times the radius. So if our radius is 2, we multiply that by 2, because you only have one half of the side. The other half would be, that's why we multiply by 2. So we've got 2 on this side, 2 on this side. That would be 4 millimeters, and that would be our diameter. So let me just change my color pen here just to highlight some things that we need to remember. So the main formula for circumference is this one. This is the main formula. This is to calculate the circumference. C equals pi times d. But sometimes we have some things missing, or we're giving different information. And so we can move some things around to be able to calculate what we need. And so be able to get the diameter. If we're given the circumference, we just grab the circumference and we divide that by pi, and that will give us the diameter. All the steps that I showed here was just to help you understand why this formula becomes this, because sometimes people have a hard time remembering so many formulas. So you don't have to remember so many, as long as you know what to do when you plug in the numbers. So if we plug in the numbers using the main formula that we have here, we plug in the 250, which is the circumference that we already have, the 3.14, which is pi, which we already know, and diameters is what we're missing. This is what we need to find out what it is. So in order to find out what it is, well, we need to make sure that we move all the other numbers to the other side of the equation. And so I was teaching a little bit of algebra there. In order to do that and leave the d by itself, you gotta move this 3.14 to the other side, and because it's multiplying, we always do the opposite. The opposite of multiplication is division. And so when we move it to the other side, this is what we get. 250 over 3.14, which is the same thing as this other formula that we have here, which is circumference over pi. That's exactly what we have right here. Circumference over pi. This is circumference, and 3.14 is pi, and that will give us diameter, which is this 79.61, and in this case was meters. If you've got a good memory and you can remember multiple formulas, then great. You remember this formula for calculating the circumference, and you remember this other formula for calculating the diameter.